Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from, because our guest today is on the Pacific Coast, and I'm here near the Atlantic Ocean. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 15 of season 3, The Black Writers Read. My name is Nicole Young Martin, and I am the founder, producer, and host of this series. I am even more super excited, not only to host our guest, Lisbeth, who we've been in conversation for a while about today, but I'm even more excited because earlier today I heard that today is National Independent Bookstore Day. That I'm like, oh my God. If you know me and know me for a long time, bookstores is my jam. It's my safe space. I've written plays in bookstores and things like that. So today, to celebrate, please be sure to check out bookshop.org to find your local bookstore, support your local bookstore, and find books like today's American Sycamore, or books by other authors by other authors that were featured on Black Writers Read. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind-the-scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020, we've hosted over 50 authors representing various genres, including children's books, young adult fiction, poetry, urban creative nonfiction, memoir, history, horror, essays, food, and culture from around the globe, including Western Massachusetts, Maryland, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Florida, upstate New York's Hudson Valley, Philadelphia, Vermont, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Chicago, Virginia, Indiana, Portugal, Costa Rica, and St. Martin. Today, we welcome Lisbeth White. Lisbeth White is a writer and ritualist living on the S'klallam and Chimacum, my apologies if I mispronounced it, lands of Port Townsend, Washington. As a cross-genre writer of poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction, her writing explores the sensual and sociopolitical intersections of healing, ancestry, mythopoetics, and connection to the natural world. She has received support from VONA, which is the Voices of Our Nation, Artist Trust, Ten House, Loaf Environmental Writers Conference, and Blue Mountain Center. Her work has appeared in the Rumpus, Kweli, Apogee Lit, Green Mountains Review, Willowherb Review, EcoTheo Review, Split This Rock, and elsewhere. She is the author of the poetry collection American Sycamore, winner of the 2022 Perugia Press Prize, and co-editor of the anthology Poetry as Spellcasting, Poems, Essays, and Prompts for Manifesting Liberation and Reclaiming Power, published by North Atlantic Books, which is scheduled to be released next month. To learn more about Lisbeth, please visit her website at www.lisbethwrites.com. Throughout today's episode, I will be sharing links to her website and also social media. Today's episode is presented in collaboration with Perugia Press. Perugia Press, founded in 1997, is a nonprofit feminist press that publishes one beautifully designed book each year, hence what we have here, the winner of the Perugia Press Prize, their annual national contest for first or second books of poetry by women-identified authors. Their mission is to support and promote women's voices in print, and they aim to expand the audience for poetry by making books that welcome longtime readers of poetry and those new to poetry. Perugia celebrates and promotes their poets and poetry through social media, their website, their e-newsletter, at local, regional, and national book fairs, and at readings and events to support their authors and foster community with writers and other literary arts organizations. They also maintain resources for educators who would like to incorporate Perugia books into classrooms and reading circles. Showing this book again that we're going to be talking about today, American Sycamore, there is a reading guide that is on Perugia Press's website for this book. Their books have won, I'm missing something. Perugia Press is doing their part to tip the scales of gender inequity in poetry into balance one book at a time. Their books have won many acclaimed prose publication prizes, including the James Laughlin Award from the Academy of American Poets, the L.L. Winship Penn New England Award, the Penn Center USA Award, and the Publishing Triangle Audre Lorde Poetry Prize, to name a few. Visit their website at PerugiaPress.org. Find them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, also at PerugiaPress. Special thanks to Rebecca Hart Olinda of Perugia Press for making it all happen today. During Lisbeth's reading, I will be sharing both social media handles and also websites for both her and the press as well. For those who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of our show. Lisbeth will read excerpts from American Sycamore, then we'll chat about the book and her body of work. If time remains at the end of the conversation, we'll open it up to questions and answers with those who are joining us today. We have viewers joining us from both Facebook and YouTube. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform where you're joining us from today. I will compile the questions and either pose them to our guests following our conversation or insert them during an appropriate time within our chat. I'd now like to bring Lisbeth on to the virtual stage. Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Yes, it's so great to finally have you on. We talked about this how many months ago?
I don't even know. What are months? What is time? But it was a while ago. It definitely was. Thanks for the lovely introduction. I'm always like, do people get used to hearing their bios?
Yes!
I'm not used to it. Sometimes I'm like, oh, who's that?
I be like, wait, I did. Okay, I did that. Yeah, you did all that and more, because I discovered today that you have a separate website for your energy work that you do, and I was like,
yes, that's the healing work is, I'm sure we'll get into this, but it's both the counterbalance and the ballast, and sometimes the leading edge for my writing is that work, mostly on a personal front, but yeah, it's very tight in there. So people are out here doing stuff. Me, you, probably every writer, everybody.
Yeah, so the stage is yours and have fun reading.
Okay, so I'm going to read, I think I have time to do maybe 3 or 4 poems. We'll see if I can. I tend to give a lot of context to my poems sometimes, but I want to make sure we have time for questions. So what I do like to invite people to do, so if you're live streaming this, or if you're watching this, or you're just listening to it, is to take a moment and just like arrive in yourself. And because this book is so heavily around ancestry and landscape and relationship to nature and healing, I really want to invite people to kind of get in touch with some of the resource they have around that, because some of these poems are a little intense. So what I want to invite you to do first is, if you are in a place where you can close your eyes and settle in and take a few breaths, do that. If you can't close your eyes, then you can hold a soft gaze, or just put a little bit of extra attention on your breath. That's also a way to just kind of get you present in the moment and actually breathe all the way into yourself and breathe all the way into your body, and remember that you have a body and remember that it's here. And as you're breathing into your body and into yourself, let yourself stretch or move, whatever might be wanting some attention. And then I want to invite you to breathe all the way down to the root of your body. You don't even have to know what or where that is, but just in the intention to send your breath down to the root of your body. And then let that breath travel from the root of your body into the earth underneath you, and feeling yourself on this earth, on this planet, connected wherever you are. And take a moment and acknowledge, many of us are living in places that have Indigenous ancestry that is not necessarily our Indigenous ancestry. So taking a moment and just sending some acknowledgement for the different relationships that we have with land. Right? And then in this place, I always like to invite people to think of just whatever their favorite place on earth is. So it could be your bedroom, it could be a lake or a river or a garden, or even just a place that you've maybe seen a picture of, but just kind of bring into your mind and into your field a little bit, someplace that on earth or in nature that you really love and adore, and just kind of feel your connection there. And then along with that, I want to invite you to allow an ancestry who's connected to land, or could use some healing and connection to land, or whoever just shows up. Somebody might be showing up because they want to hear these poems today. Allow yourself to invite them into the space and connect with them also. And typically what I do when I'm doing a reading live with people I can see is I invite you to say one or both of those names out loud, the name of the place, the name of the ancestor. So you're welcome to do that here also. And then we can all just kind of be in this space together. So welcome. I'm going to start with the first poem that starts this book, American Sycamore, which is called Seeds from My Grandmother's Hair. We sat in a rowboat on the bayou, the night pitching us a deeper dark. From the slick ebon of the swamp floor, golden skeletons flume upwards. The bones know who I am. Grandmother, the first time we met was in a dream. Cotton, 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 fibrous desert. Then this plot, flowers in front, berries and pecan in back, the chimney and stubborn thrust amidst bramble and hedge gone to seed. Long burnt, I can see the ghost of floor. Now the earth wild, where her home had stood wild, where her home wild. She put fingers to humus and opened earth. Medicine from the underbrush called to plain sight. Mullein softens a cough. Cramp bark eases, minces, also ties up the devil. Gardenia with its gleaming scent to call a spirit back from the deep. How long can filament grow in the memory of hands? Who has sewn this familiar closed-mouth smile into my reflection? What seeds do you have for me, grandmother, from your calico hair, your thicketed tongue, your flowering brow? If I plant thyme under my window, will I become rich? If I keep this gardenia alive through the damp western winter, will you come back? The essential blessing of water, light on outstretched limbs, a place rich and deep to pull from. Sometimes when I am planting, I hear myself love murmuring into stems, roots, leaves. I see you, I see you, I know you, I do. Past the big house and its columns of decay, the uncolored dog that chases and nips car tires down the road turned dirt. December whipping the winds like an old dish towel. Dad and Aunt Josie remember exactly which flowers grew near the gulched edge. I was never brought till now, spidering through grass brown and waist high toward the pecan trees, my chest a small, tight bundle, aching for a memory of cells. From this ground where it rises to hold roots, for the winter clean branches to gather me. That is a poem from my great grandmother, Marie. So I think I'm gonna focus and read some of the poems that we're probably gonna talk about a little bit later. This book has a lot of series of interlocking kind of similarly titled poems. There's like a tree series and a bridge series. And I'm going to read the beginning of Awakening of Stones, which is an outline. And I'll show you that. I'm not going to read all the bullet points, but let's see. Woo, just so you know, it's written in the form of an outline, the way an academic paper starts with an outline, which is kind of the bullet points. And I'll talk a little bit more about this poem as we get into the interview, but I think just for context, one of the things to know is that this is centered on a court case for a young Black man that was convicted of a very severe sentence for a very minute crime in Alabama. Awakening of Stones, an outline. 1. The question has been, who called you here? To this life, to this birth, in this body, in this place, in this time. To this city between rivers, sobbing tears into your body even as you were born. Which ancestors? What earth? 2. When you enter the market of this court, you must enter alone. You are to leave your grandmothers and grandfathers at the gate. How else will you feel lonely enough to believe something other than yourself, your own long spine trunking you from heaven to earth, the stones already speaking to you beneath your feet? Some do not know stones as bones of ancestors become earth, that stones will remember you. 3. The stones themselves want us to know they are not all the same, elegant, communal, some willing to hold form, pyramid, or simple company in the hand. Some let themselves be made, grit grievance collected, packed into the soft organs, the pain of another labor. They say it is just like giving birth, passing our own flint into the world. It is true, the first weapon we grasp is our own hardness. You weren't born obsidian, sharp-edged and brow-cutting, but now, here, you are black enough to split skin, set free the body's own salty minerals. 4. Your laughter ricochets off the courtroom walls like water flung against river rock. To be included in the endnotes, I have always found beauty in cascade, both the word and the action. The way it pushes from the mouth without force, simple propulsion, then falling after itself, water in free fall for just a moment suspended on air. B. The witnesses in the room feel the laugh and assault, except for those who are stone. Except those bent by suffering and memory, the sound of weariness crimping the joints of bodies always meant to be broken, always meant to be broken, always meant to be broken. 5. Throw the stones. Go ahead, all of them. Knock out the lights as you throw them in the dark. 6. Known by the tread of your walk on the first drum of earth, unique as a fingerprint. Both ancestor and earth called you beloved, the sweet pressure of your souls almost fast enough. That was Awakening of Stones. Actually, I think I'm going to jump a little bit here. Part of this book was going to different ancestral homelands, so I identify as, a lot of different things, a lot for different times. Right now, I identify as Black mixed race, and so much of this book is around healing different ancestries. So I had some time to go to different ancestral homelands, and part of that included going to Europe. And this is from the Bridge series in the book. This is called Bridge to an Empire. At first, all I can think and feel is how far away the lands of worry. How juvenile the US of A, fractured by its rampant loss. Look how clean and simple this white cup and saucer by comparison. How long an afternoon spent at a cafe on the square. I admit there is an ease to which I stretch my days, a matter-of-factness in procuring diversion one task at a time. Now I am wandering the curved street. Now I am taking hot chocolate near the park. Now I am watching the canal move its water. How languid a land can be when blood is secondary. the fruit for this warm drink, cut from bodies far away, soaking in earth just as fabled into distance. But not this dirt beneath the wire-footed cafe chair. And not my body. For once, not my body. It is so easy to believe, effortless as time built on another continent. I love it. I do. The chocolate creamy enough to thicken my tongue. So I think I'll just read two more. I'm going to read the title poem, American Sycamore. And then I'm going to finish up with one of my favorite poems to end with, which is also the final poem in the book, which I think of as a blessing poem. So we'll get there in a moment. This is American Sycamore. Did they not remember the smell of our necks, nor the vibration of our throats humming in the shade? Did they not delight in my sister's climbing habits, nor stretch their limbs to lift her? Didn't they hear us whisper secrets into peeling trunk, breath passed into the white bark beneath? Didn't we live as a forest, and didn't we die also the same, our lives mere material for an other living? We ran, and didn't they camouflage our brown bodies with their own? We swung, and didn't they want to offer us to God like the gifts we were? I think I need to read one of my fun poems after that. That's such an intense poem for me to read usually all the time. Let me see if I have some some fun poems in here. One of my favorite poems is this one. It's called Origin of Air, which I actually consider to be a love poem. It is my love poem for the northern New Mexico landscape where I spent some time when I was young and wild. Origin of Air. Meanwhile, I hadn't forgotten about the desert. The blue grasp of sky lifting everything, chilly skins roasted crisp, leaves furling their browned deaths, everything willing to lose itself of gravity. I drank like one of the boys, pinched liquor daily resting the walls of my veins, which is to say, an aggressive defense of any night magisterial to my minutia. I mean, I wanted to be mountains, rooted like molars in the mouth of that big sky. I wanted to be the mesa's mare, Satine and mane coursing, to pound my wildness into flesh and call it freedom. How could I know then of stillness so deep that land arcs itself through the body? Miranda's puppy died of a black widow bite. We claimed, then traded lovers like they were shared sheets. Someone several times took needles to their skin. There are ways I still hear wind as if it's curving off a canyon wall. Dusted red with whistle and expect Jessie to come ambling through a guitar string, plucking at my pulse the way I will always wish a lover to do. I won't say something long and low didn't crawl aching into my chest each time a coyote sent its yipped bellow across the night. I won't say that, perched on some mountainous hook of the Sandias, dusk of land sprawling alive as an exhale, I didn't want the wingedness of a Morrigan or a saint. All that expanse sirened me to it. Heat whispered the flight across my shoulders. I never even wondered how to give myself over. I never even questioned the wind's catch. Okay, anybody who's ever been in New Mexico probably can feel that big sky poem. Okay, so I'm going to end with reading this poem, Residence Time, which is the last poem in the book. And again, I consider this to be a blessing poem, which is why I put it towards the end, and why I like reading it last. The one note about this residence time is the amount of time that matter essentially stays itself or its same molecular structure before it starts breaking down into something else. And different landscapes have different residence times. And the residence time for the oceans is like 3,000 years, which means that the matter that's in the ocean has been around for 3,000 years. And that had a lot of implications for me as I was thinking about ancestry and the ancestors who are residing in the oceans right now. How we can literally touch them, when we go in. This poem was written in Barbados, and another poet friend of mine, Joelle, makes an appearance in here in a very poetic way. And this is also a good time if you called in any ancestors or your particular landscape that you love to just bring those close together again, and we'll get a little blessing here on everybody. Residence time. Not volcanic, but layered sediment pushed this island to emergence. In the heart of it, 3,200 meters below the cane green top crest, stalactites and stalagmites drip and stack toward each other, closing distance at 1 millimeter per year. Joelle wonders what this means about love. The north side cliffs are pocked with holes gaping out to the Atlantic's rough blue. Pools 8 or 9 or 12 feet deep host animal flowers and ghost crabs. Blind, because who needs sight where no light enters? Where it can be felt beneath skirting feet. The geologies of all the dead deposited to make land for the living. I don't mean to bring up death so quickly, but already it has been millennia. Scales, bone, cartilage, ground fine by persistent tides, crushed to become shoreline and peak. Grandfathers were sorted in this first port. Grandmothers dust the seafloor. Here is what they made for us, Joelle. An island of chambers, not violently erupted, but held by the offerings of the body. Collection of cavernous pockets in which we can slip toward each other like tears. See each other coming from 1,000 years away to create beneath the den a cathedral. Thank you.
Thanks. I want to comment with something that my assistant Candace De Leon mentioned as she, excuse me, was preparing to do the research on your work.
Mm.
She mentioned that it reads very cinematically. That, excuse me, I'm still having that cough. Where you can literally see where you want to take the reader. Like we see the story. It reads very cinematically. And also too, it's like you want us to accompany the journey and find our way there as opposed to yes, you illustrate very well through your words, but it's like we're accompanying the journey as your friend and not as you as the tour guide, if that makes sense.
That's wonderful. I love that. Thank you, Candace. I mean, I just love the word cinematic, right? Like it feels so sweeping and it just appeals to like my my more romantic Piscean kind of like woo in nature, I love that. And yeah, I think my hope, I just the way that poetry is for me, it feels so much more like I'm just trying to tell people, what's a thing that's happening for me, right? So like it is like I do have this feeling when I'm writing where I'm like, okay, how can I not hold people or capture people, but how can I be in this together? Like how can we be in this together as a writer and as a reader, right? That that sense of accompaniment feels really important. And I think the poems that I really love manage also to accomplish that, right? Like there's a way where it's like, oh yeah, we're in this. I'm in this with you, right? You're not telling me a thing. You're like bringing me there. So that's amazing. Thanks.
So the first question I have, and as everyone who follows Black Writers Read knows, my questions are very hefty and hearty from the very beginning. So I'd like to start off today's conversation by asking, what is the origin story of American Sycamore? And then what is the story behind the title? And also the story behind the beautiful book cover. Rebecca Hart Orlander kind of gave me, a precursor to ask the question, especially about the book cover. So I'd love to hear, essentially, what do we know as American Sycamore today? How did it come to be?
Yes. I love that Becky prompted you to ask that question about the book cover. Wow. Okay. So American Sycamore started actually with that first poem in the book. And this was I probably started writing it in like early 2016. So the beginning of 2016, before the election happened, but all of that stuff that was leading up to the 2016 election, like just remember the world in the beginning of 2016. It was like, Trump had been out there doing things and a lot of doing shit and a lot of things happened. So that was kind of the context. And what happened was that also dovetailed to just some of my own personal healing journey in terms of my own personal spiritual practice was becoming a lot more ancestrally based. And like, as I mentioned in my reading, I identify as mixed race, bicultural. Again, I like to let myself change that up as I need to for any occasion. But that means I have this mixed ancestry, right? Or this bicultural or tricultural ancestry. And I was finding when I was doing this ancestry work, I was like, oh, I have to pay attention to everybody, right? Like I can't cherry pick here who I'm connecting to. I mean, in some ways I can, because I want to set boundaries and just have healthy relationships across the board, with ancestors and living people. But if I'm really doing this work and then I'm responsible for attending to everyone. And so that meant I had to look at healing ancestors who had been really oppressed, and healing ancestors who had been oppressors and what that meant. So initially what started this was this, which is why there's so much ancestry in this book, right? Was this study of what it was like to be really deep in that ancestral work, and then going to, like Europe and what that was like over there and what it was like to encounter. And landscape was the way that was the entrance for me, because my family wasn't able to do a lot of genealogical tracking, right? So I would mostly just kind of put myself in a space where I knew my ancestry had been, and really living in that. So that was kind of the origin. And then, as you start writing, all these things start, coming in from the sides about like, oh yeah, this part too. And then don't forget this. And so then it started, becoming the collection that it was going to be. So that's kind of the short origin story of American Sycamore. The title was not always the title. And this is actually one of Becky from Perugia, my editor at Perugia, was really helpful in this. I just have to shout out Becky really quickly, because it's like she's amazing to work with, and I highly recommend it for any poets. It really taught me the difference of like, oh yes, this is what it feels like when an editor is like vibing with what your work and what you're doing. And it felt so collaborative, and I really felt like she was uplifting my work. So this collection actually had a totally different title. It was called The Asking Pool, which I actually still really love as a title.
Wow.
But it comes from one line in the center of the longest poem of the book, which is in the center of the book. So it's kind of buried deep in there. And as we were going through the editorial process, Becky was like, you should, I get where you're going with this title. And let's really think about, what the reader and where they're going to encounter this, and how this is going to feel for somebody picking up your book, to be searching for the title, and then when they finally, just to be thoughtful about placement that way. So we were going through, and then somehow I think maybe she'd even marked American Sycamore. But I thought about it for a long time because I was like really attached to the asking pool as a title. So I was like, all right, let me just sit on this for like a few weeks and think about it. And then at some point, I think I like picked up the manuscript and was going through and editing, and I got to the poem American Sycamore, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a heart of the book. Like, I think this book probably has like a lot of different major organs, but this poem, which feels so simple and so like, feels like one of my more precise poems in the book. I was like, I can see why this feels like it could be a title that could really hold a lot. So that's how the title came about. This is why it's important to listen to editors sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes when they know your work, it's really, really important, right? And then as far as this cover goes, this is another long story. So the answers to these questions are going to probably be pretty long. So this is a textile. This is actually a graphic of a textile piece. By an amazing artist, Amara Hollowbones, who has actually since passed away. Yeah, so Amara, so we were looking at cover art and thinking about artists, and Amara also, let me see if my book's still marked up. This graphic on the first page is also Amara Hollowbone, and then it's kind of, I forgot what they call it. I keep calling it the ghost, but that's not what they call it. It's like, it does this, they do a lighter version of for all the section dividers in here. Anyway, I actually knew Amara from a mutual friend that we had when I was in the Bay Area, who I went to graduate school with, who had actually passed away from a really severe cancer pretty early, like in her early 30s. And that's how Amara and I connected, because we met through this mutual friend. And so that's how I knew about Amara's artwork, and also just like a very witchy, earth-based person who did a lot of work around some just reclaiming relationships to wildness. Essentially, was kind of Amara's thing. And so we were looking at Amara's artwork as a possibility, and I was actually hesitant to reach out because at the time Amara had also been diagnosed with like a very aggressive cancer, also at the same age as our friend who had passed away like 6 years before. So I was like, I don't know, this feels like I know they're really struggling. It feels like a really sensitive time to be like, hey, can I use your artwork for my book? And Becky also was really helpful in thinking it through, and was like, you know what, this might actually be a really good time to check about legacy, honestly, right? And like how they're feeling about how their art is moving out into the world, and offering this opportunity for it to move out into the world in another way. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. I hadn't thought about it like that. So I did reach out to Amara, and Amara was like very, very happy to do it, and did actually respond with like, it feels really good to know that my work is having an impact, especially right now, going through what I'm going through. So we got permission to use their artwork, and then about 3 weeks after that, they passed away. Yes. So
3 weeks.
About 3 weeks after. Yes, it was like very, yeah. It was very, it was really, really moving. And I wasn't super close with Amara, but there's something about that feels really good about being able to uplift their work along with my own. It just felt really like the right thing to do. And then, going through it, other people in our community were like, well, of course, our mutual friend was probably up there, in the sky, just like pulling strings and, and making connections so that this thing could happen. Yeah. but Amara Hollowbones, you can Google. I think that their Instagram page is still up. Their website is still up.
Wow.
So they still have a lot of artwork still moving around and out into the world. And yeah, very
Do they
beautiful.
have an estate at all? Like who's managing?
Yes. So there's another group called Temple of the Waters, which is kind of the community that we connected through. And Amara was, let's see, I think inherited some family property up in Canada somewhere. I'm not quite sure. I think the east coast of
Okay.
Canada. And they were I know they hadn't inherited it. They had inherited some money and bought some land, and their intention was to keep kind of buying up a little bit of the property so they could give it back to the Indigenous First Nation folks of Canada. And so all of the proceeds that are happening with their artwork going forward are going to gifting or giving these lands back. Kind of micro movement. So yeah, so if supporting Amara's work is going to continue to support some land justice.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that story. Like I'm glad that it is beautiful. I was afraid this was the ending that it was going to be. I was prepared for that. I
Yeah,
didn't realize it was going to be so soon after the conversation. Like
yeah.
that's deep. It's
I
like,
know. I know.
wow, I bet like cuz I believe that there's like a time and a space for people to be ready, and I wonder if for them they're like, my work is going to a beautiful place. My work is going to beautiful hands. I can now let go.
I hope so. I hope that was
Yeah.
the case. Oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. That's really beautiful. I
Yeah,
hope
because
that was the case, really. Yeah.
this is like for me, and I'm glad that this is the book title
Mhm.
and the cover art, because to me, this says we're getting into some roots. We're getting into some roots, into some foundations. Like this works perfectly for
Yeah.
what you're doing in the book.
Yeah. And it's quilted too. I love that it was a textile too because it's quilted,
Wow.
right? And I have a poem in here about quilting at some point, but it's like, my grandmothers were quilters. So it just works on like so many levels that probably the average person picking up the book won't quite know. But it was really,
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly, it couldn't have been another cover, right? There's no way. So yeah, that's the
Yeah.
That's Amara and American Sycamore. And it feels,
Nice.
yeah, and it yeah, I'm just glad that I have them connected to this artwork. It also makes me, I'm gonna do a little plug right now for like support your local artists.
Yes.
Support your artists because you never know, like it means so much sometimes to the individual, but also just like this is how we create artistic community, right? Is by
Yeah.
like feeding each other's work. So that's my public service announcement
Yeah.
for
And
today.
also too, like collaboration, and we have a question about that later on, but collaboration
Mhm.
is just so key to my practice. Speaking of, I recently, and I believe it's still up at 50 Arrow Gallery in East Hampton, Massachusetts, I collaborated with Ella Nathaniel Alkowitz, who I've worked with numerous times as a poet, but she's also an amazing visual artist. I wrote a poem based off of one of her visual art pieces that's in the gallery right now.
Ooh.
And she all of her work is connected to like ancestry and honoring the land and her native ancestry. And like that was my first time ever writing a piece connecting
Mm.
back to the environment. And it was a stretch, but I needed the challenge. I remember Jason was like, we really want you to do this. And I was like, I'm in dissertation mode. If I could do, I haven't written creatively in years. Okay, I got this. And so I'm glad that I had that opportunity. And then this, having you on here. And this takes us segue into the next question, but it's like, I know for myself, someone of deep, 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 deep 92, 93% West African ancestry that I found out about.
Mm.
And like, being reared here at least like 4 or 5 generations, including enslavement, like how can we reconnect back to the land? Because I'm like I come from a family of farmers and all of that, and possibly, back in West Africa, and I'm just like, but somebody, I grew up in a very urban situation. I grew up in Detroit, so it's just like, how
Mm-hmm.
do you reconnect back to the land? And I'm like, I think I can now do that through writing. So I'm like, what can my new literary voice be? And I'm like, oh, time to push myself. And I would love to use your voice as that model, because I think it's a really beautiful gateway to start that type of work.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's happening more and more in like our social context kind of field right now, right? Like there's
Yeah.
definitely, which this could be this could take us totally sideways. So I don't know if you want me to, I have a lot to say about the subject of like land justice and spiritual justice and healing
Yeah.
justice and where they all intersect, right? Like there is something about how do you find your relationship? How do you find your relationship to this planet that we're on? Because I think one of the biggest, and I talk about it as a spiritual justice issue, but one of the biggest ways, like all like capitalism and white supremacy and like all those ism, one of the biggest wins they had was distorting and disrupting our relationships to land and place. Like
That's a good point.
to me, there is no, like, if you feel like you don't belong anywhere, then you're just open and super vulnerable to being shaped into whatever else anybody wants you to be, right? But if you, and again, I don't know, not everybody has the resources to like go to Africa, or like I didn't have the genealogical resources to find some of those finer points of like my ancestry. But there is something about going to the places that your bloodlines have had connection. And there's still, even most important is like, what is your relationship to the place where you are now? Because you have one. You have
Right.
one. Even if you're in Detroit or you're in a big urban setting, like we're on the planet. There's no way.
Right.
Have one, right?
Yeah. So I think this segues nicely into the next. We're only on question 2, y'all. This is going to be an amazing conversation today. We're taking y'all to church and back. And I hope y'all are ready for this is going to be a good ride today. The opening poem, Seeds from My Grandmother's Hair, reads like it could be my own grandmother and possibly others' grandmothers. I absolutely love that you invite the reader in by evoking stories of an American grandmother. What's the inspiration behind Seeds from My Grandmother's Hair, and why the choice to open American Sycamore with this poem?
Yes. So seeds. So if we go back again to when I started writing this book, like early 2016, right? And I was doing my ancestry. I was starting to do my own ancestry work and ancestral work, and I started having dreams about my great grandmother Marie, who died. I hadn't met in real life. She died when I was pretty young, right? So I know this is like, it's gonna get witty in here. I'm just gonna tell you.
Bring it.
So I started having dreams, and so I wrote this poem, and this is like literally this is the first poem in the book because it was literally like the first poem I wrote where I was like, oh, I think there's a book. This poem, I wrote it, and anyway, there was just something about it, and I was like, I can write along these threads for a really long time, and it feels like I need to. So that's part of the reason it's the first poem in the book, was because it was the first poem of the book that I wrote. But the other reason I kind of put it in the beginning was because, again, it was kind of parallel process. Like this was the first ancestor that was showing up to me as I started doing this ancestral work, and writing was my way of doing it, right? So it felt important to kind of honor that in this way. It's like this poem is kind of like my pouring a libation, right? It's acknowledging the forces that came in first to support me in writing this book. And that's the other reason why I like to actually read this poem first, is because there's something that does feel a little bit ritualistic and kind of acknowledging that libation sense, right? Of like, this is the support that I had, this is the history, this is where I've been, we're going to go somewhere. But my hope is also, just like you said, you felt like it kind of connected to your grandmother or a grandmother. My hope is also that because this book goes to some of the places that it goes to, that it anchors the reader or the people that I'm reading to in the sense of like being held. Right? Like, here's a root. Here's a root. Maybe this can help you like trust me or trust yourself, or trust both of us to move through and be taken along the ride of this writing or this reading.
Amber Flora Thomas, author of Eye of Water Poems, offers this praise for American Sycamore. The poems in American Sycamore are talisman, and we need them for the long journey towards belonging somewhere and somehow. For White, a Black mixed-race poet, the body is a battleground for myth and action. Her whole body, a cross-reference wound. This is a book of travel and the restlessness of the human spirit to incorporate an inheritance of competing stories. What struck me was the need in this poet to take on the daunting task of healing a legacy of slavery and racism within herself, to find the right apology for all of us. We need to set up and take notice here. American Sycamore is a fine book. So, why have you taken on all of these daunting tasks with this book? Because that's a heavy set task.
You're right. You're so right. I know. Believe me, there was more than one time in the writing of this where I was like, why am I doing this? What am I doing? Which was also, like, is this something that I can even do? Like, can this be done? Can reparation? Oh my goodness. I was going to say, can reparations happen in the body?
Oh, wow.
And that's not even my line. So this is Harmony Holiday wrote an essay called Reparations Begin in the Body. And it was an essay about why the Black poet needs to pay attention to the body, right? It's really brilliant. Y'all can look it up. I don't think I have it bookmarked on my browser anymore. But that's why. Because of Harmony Holiday. Let me put it on her. Just kidding. Just kidding. Was it all Harmony Holiday? I think this also goes back to like, just where I was, or what I mentioned before, like my own personal healing process informs so much of where I go with my writing. Also because I started writing as a way of healing, right? Like, it was such an important way for me to understand my experience. And so there's some times where I'm like, I don't even know. Sometimes I wish I could, but I don't even know how much I could separate out my personal inquiries and personal healing journey from my writing. They're so deeply intertwined for me. And sometimes I think that's a really hard, challenging thing. And sometimes I think it's the best thing in the world. And usually it's a mix of both because, non-binary. Right. we don't exist on the binary, really. So I was doing, all of that to say, I was doing this ancestral work, and this was the way that the writing was the way for me to kind of met that out and articulate that for myself. And it became really important for my racial identity development to find a way to, again, have that reparation in the body, or have that place of feeling like at least, and nothing else, like all of my ancestors could show up in a room together and like be cool, right? And like that would.
Can I ask what ancestry, so I can know how they would play together in the sandbox?
Yes. So there is absolutely West African, my father's side. I mostly connect to their South Carolinian for many generations. So, that thing that was a very specific place, right? But coming from West Africa, and then On my mother's side, it was some French. Mostly what came forward was Belgian, right? And Flemish.
Whoa! If we know about colonization.
Right. Right. So this is like some real intense, you know, some real intense imperial colonizing forces, right? And it was actually interesting. This is another little side note. But I went to Belgium, it kind of magically happened. It wasn't quite on purpose, but I ended up being able to go to Belgium while I was writing this. And my grandfather told me about his grandfather, who was Flemish and who came over after, like, right at the end of the Civil War. And then when I got over to Europe and I was like studying some of this, I was like, wow. And even Flemish people were like colonized, right? Like Europe was really on some stuff. Like there was a lot of conquering. There was a lot of conquering that was happening in Europe, like forever. It seems like they were doing it for a really, really long time. So, then of course it becomes this thing where it's, I'm like, I just want my ancestor to be able to come into the room and be able to support, if nothing else, be able to support me in a way that feels okay, right? And then you get into like the healing backwards into time that I believe is possible. So then how, again, this comes back to the responsibility piece I have, right? About like, how am I showing up for this ancestry that does come through me, right? Like I have, I'm part white. That comes through. It shows up in some different ways. It shows up in some different privileges I have that are afforded to me in this culture, not because I asked for them, but because, white supremacy. So how do I manage that in integrity? And I'm kind of losing my train of thought here. I don't know why it's a good eye. It just seemed like the thing to do.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely like, as without, so within, right? Like there's no, if I can't, my background is as a therapist, and I was always of the mind and of the learning that your clients will only go as far with you as you are willing to go with yourself. And so I do have kind of this thing in my mind about, I want this world to be more harmonious and at peace and like have space for everybody. And am I able to do that with myself, like internally with my ancestry? I need to figure out how to do that here if I'm going to try to like live that out into the world. Yeah.
And then Opal, who is an amazing writer, her and I've worked together before. And she has also been on an earlier Black Rosary, like in season 1, on composites. Excuse me. She has an amazing question that I need to pose now.
Okay.
Excuse me. So she would love to know, it's going to be heavy, y'all, what your thoughts on the passing of Carolyn Bryant Dunham are in terms of, especially since your work speaks of healing and the Black body. If you have a comment at all about that. Because, like, I remember seeing it circulating on social media and I was like, water is wet. Like, yeah.
I think, okay, I think I have maybe like some broad stroke kinds of, not super specific to this, but some broad stroke kind of things about that I think could be at play with this passing, right? One is, I mean, part of the reason I even undertook some of this like healing backwards ancestry and being like, oh, I need to pay attention to like the colonizers and oppressors in my line, right? Is because I don't believe that anybody gets out of these systems that have been created scot-free, right? Like I don't believe, and ultimately people get out alive. It's not the word I want to use, but like kind of untainted, right? Like I think that there is some soul illness or soul sickness that happens when we don't do reparative work, whatever that looks like, right? And that will carry on whatever you believe about the afterlife, that will be something that will come back until that reparative work comes through, right? In this lifetime, and some other lifetime, in some other dimension, and somebody else, like whatever you believe about that. The other thing I can say is that I do think that there's something that happens with so, people talk about Ashe as kind of like a life force energy, that when people pass away, that some form of that energy gets freed up. And then that is up to us to utilize that energy in the way that is best for ourselves, for the collective, for the healing, for the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't. That was a really good question, Opal. I don't. I feel like I kind of walked around it a little bit.
Yeah,
but I think those are kind of my bigger. Yeah, I'm interested to see like what energy is freed up now that particular iteration of human is not on this plane, right? Like what is opened from that passing. And then I also mostly again like have that belief of like, well, you can't get out here without doing the work.
Yeah,
you don't got to do it this lifetime, but it's gonna happen. You're gonna do it.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this, especially since you gave some context behind these poems, this leads into a really great next few questions. So you read one of the first Awakening of Stones poems and gave the context to why you wrote it. So the collections of poems throughout the book with Awakening of Stones as its beginning title. They each read as they could be their own collection. They all carry a specific cadence, rhythm, and ritual and repetition of certain words. They also have a very unique narrative and subjectivity of their own. Can you talk us through these poems and how they appear in American Sycamore as they are spread out amongst the book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Awakening of Stones was again written based on this court case, and I didn't mention it in the book because I was traveling, and so I wasn't tracking the court case, and I didn't know how public the family was being around it. But I do want to mention, because they are actually very public and looking for a lot of support, this is about Lakeith Smith. So this is someone that y'all can also look up and support in what ways that you can. But he was a teenager, essentially, who was doing a breaking and entering and was stealing some video games. And the police showed up and ended up killing one of his friends. And then he was held liable and sentenced for the death of his friend. And then there's just other atrocious things happening with the judge and that judge's character and some of the similar, anyway, we all know these this kind of story, right? But I was really, so again, this was 2016, and I was really struck by this particular story. And I think the thing that really struck me most was there was a moment where it was reported that he laughed out loud in the courtroom when his sentencing came down, and different media outlets had really different takes on that. Of course, there were some media outlets that were like, this is about blatant disrespect and blah, 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 blah. And then there are some media outlets that were like, well, of course he laughed because he probably wasn't expecting anything different than the harshest punishment, because why would he? Because he's a young Black male in the South. And that particular line of thought really brought me a lot of sorrow and in its truth, and it put me on this inquiry around like, wow, what does it feel like to walk around or what would it feel like to walk around in a world knowing that you are like, that the world just loves you and like wants to uplift you and it works in your favor, and who gets to experience that and who doesn't get to experience that. and anyway, so I had this question rolling around in my mind, and then I was trying to write this poem, and I was having a really hard time writing this poem. And then I read, this is the thing I was trying to look up before. I read this, it's actually a creative nonfiction piece by Diane Seuss about Eden, and it was written in the form of an outline. And there was something about that form that I was just like, oh my God, now I feel like I can write this. Like I know I can put this, all of this into this kind of form, this outline form. And then this question of what would it be like becomes like the deeper research inquiry for me, right? So Awakening Big Stones follows that that format of a research paper where it has the outline and then it has the literature review, right? Which is about looking up, you're more of a researcher than I am. So I just looked this up for poetry purposes. So you can correct me if I don't get it right. The literature review is about like, well, this is what the previous studies or the previous literature has told us about this question, right? The central hypothesis became this idea of like, actually you were born knowing you're beloved and powerful, and these are the, you know, what has gotten in the way of that, and what's the methodology for reclaiming that, right? So that was the impetus of the series. And then I love how it ended up taking, it was one of those things where I was like, oh my gosh, this is where I don't really consider myself a formalist, even though I kind of play around with form a lot, but this is where the form just completely supported kind of the internal intuitive work, which I think is like the ideal way for a form to show up, right? Yeah, and then I moved them throughout the book because as I was arranging the book, and I have so many different series in this book, right? That I was really into this thing around weaving and not necessarily wanting to like give somebody a chunk of experience, because that's not how I experience the world, right? Like one chunk and then you move on to the next thing. It was for me, everything experience is like, oh, this connects here and now it weaves back into here and now it harkens back to this and now I'm back here again and now I'm revisiting this thing and this like spiral thing. And so how are we all like, again, in this together? Welcome to my world.
Yes. Yes. So American Sycamore demonstrates your beautiful relationship with nature. So I would love for you to talk about how nature informs your work and how this beautifully necessary relationship develops.
Yeah. You know, I feel like we kind of touched on that before when I went on my rant around the spiritual and land and healing justice piece, right? That, you know, I do think that that's one of the biggest wounds that that we suffer as humans, is this feeling of displacement on this place that was like, we could never live anywhere else. This is the planet that can support our particular kind of living, right? So this displacement and the unbelonging and how vulnerable that leaves us to harm, right? So that's kind of the bigger philosophical thing. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so I'm used to like really big trees. And my grandfather was a forestry engineer and took us backpacking and into the backcountry and stuff when I was young. And then again, you know, when I was finding more of my ancestry in South Carolina, and my grandma Marie, and it was very striking that I went to go visit her house, which wasn't there anymore. And my father and my Aunt Josie knew exactly where all of her plants used to be, right? And I was like, well, that says something, right? Like they remember the sunflowers were here and the pecan trees were here. And, you know, that was... So I think there's this innate intuitive relationship to our surroundings in the natural world that we all have, that we keep getting really pulled away from because of the way that our systems of living are set up, right? And that there is something just about reestablishing those relationships that I think could be pretty revolutionary. I think if we did it on a ground scale. Right?
So in your bio on your website, you mentioned that you are a lover of the earth, as we've talked a lot about here, wanderer of lands, poet, expressive arts therapist, developmental editor, elemental energy healer, listener, and ancestor celebrant. So, as every Black artist or Black writers read guest wears multiple hats, you do as well. So, how do these intersecting identities show up in your work?
Mm-hmm. Um, well, a little bit like I mentioned before around like, sometimes it's hard for me to separate the healing from the art. And I don't know that they need to be separate, honestly. I really don't. Sometimes I think that is a very separatist kind of standpoint. So I started writing when I was young, as I mentioned, as a way to kind of process my own sense of the world. And then I ended up finding expressive arts therapy, which is about how do you utilize the arts, one, to get at deeper and deeper levels of experience, right? Because so much of what we experience is not verbal. It lives in our psyches, it lives in our vision, it lives in our smell, it lives in our movement and our bodies. So how do we access those through art modalities? And then also how is the creative process in and of itself like inherently healing? I mean, when you can apply creativity to any aspect of your life and your living, it is kind of life-giving, right? It helps you to, at the very least, problem solve more creatively, and at the very most, like, envision very broadly what you want for your life. So I started doing that work, and it was really, really fulfilling. And then I wanted to come back to my own creative process, centering my own creative process and my own writing a little bit more. And then in the midst of that, I think anybody who's worked in any healing modality can tell you it's like a rabbit hole, right? So you're into one thing, and then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, but look at astrology, and ooh, but look at hands-on work, and ooh, but look at somatics, and it just really opens up. And there's so many different ways, right? That's why healing is amazing. There's so many different modalities. So where was I going? So I was just going down all these different things and incorporating and finding all these different kind of tools that actually worked for me, or that my system really liked. The energy healing and the elemental energy healing is very land-based, and my particular system and nervous system really liked that. It really worked well to kind of loosen things up and move things forward more quickly. But then as you're in the study, or as I was in the study, I'm also writing the whole time, because that's how I metabolize my experience. So there's like again, like, I don't know that there's a way that I could have, that I don't think I can't not write without some of personal or collective healing coming into play for me, right? Because it's so much of how I understand where we're moving and what's going on and all of that. And then recently poetry is spellcasting, actually, which we can talk about a little bit later, also brings those together in a very clear form, right? Because there's more prompts about, okay, how do we access this particular type of attention, or how do we create a practice for ourselves to come back to something that might be hard again and again and again, right? In our creative lives. So those kind of do a little bit more distinct overlapping than sometimes the poetry does itself in and of itself. Yeah.
So you've had the opportunity. I've been waiting to ask you this question, because you, like, out of all of the writers who I've spoken to so far, you've had an opportunity to, like, nurture and develop your writing in very nurturing spaces. So you've had the opportunity to study creative writing with some amazing author educators, including Willie Perdomo, who oh my God, I need to find the year that he's going to be teaching at VONA again and apply for that workshop, because I'm just like, oh my God. And
Yes.
then, and then you're an alum of VONA. I'm finally one too. I did the winter intensive this year.
Yay.
Right. It took a long time to get there. And for folks who don't know VONA, Voices of Our Nation, it is legit a mecca for BIPOC writers. They host a summer, so prior to the pandemic, they hosted a summer intensive that's really hard to get in. I've applied multiple times, and it was in person. I think like Miami a couple of years, the West Coast a couple of years, and then when things moved to mainly virtual, they started doing intensives online, and I did one this past year, and it was just an amazing experience. So you've had an opportunity to work with and develop your writing at VONA, Tin House, Loaf Environmental Writers Conference, and Blue Mountain Center. These are all spaces that I am aware of that are very nurturing and caring for writers to further develop their voices, because the writing education world for folks, it is a clear binary. It is either we're going to nurture your writing, or we're going to be like MFA programs and cut you down, and you have to like figure your way back up. I'm not going to lie, like that's just the way it is. And I love that you found opportunities to work in spaces where you are truly nurtured. Like I feel like you arrive to these spaces, they swaddle you in a blanket, and like, they give you a care package, and they're like, yeah, we're going to take care of you the week while you're here.
They do give you care packages.
Y'all just don't know. Like, right, and I've been to both types of. I've been to one where I left in the middle of the week. I don't care how much I paid for it. I was like, this is horrible. This was completely traumatizing. And then I had experiences like VONA, which was just so caring and nurturing. Everyone was so affirming. It was just like, yes. And I, got some of my best critique and feedback during that session, but also too, they made it very brave and very safe. So how have these relationships nurtured both you as a writer and your writing? And then what does it mean to you to write in the company and comfort of BIPOC writers?
Yes. Oh, you said so many things in there.
Yes!
It's so real. So I didn't do the MFA route because I got my master's in counseling psychology, right? So there's some ways where I'm like, I really lucked out, and I didn't realize how lucky I was until I ended up in I looked up, because when I started back writing again, VONA was one of the first places I went. And then I went to the Watering Hole, which I also want to mention as like a very nurturing, wonderful space. They're based in the South, and they do retreats for Black poets. And it was just like fed all of the everything, right? Yeah. And Loaf Environmental Conference. I haven't gone to the other Loaf, which I hear is a totally different vibe, but this environmental conference is very, there's a lot of humility because people are really caring about, again, this relationship to land. So there was a natural affinity, I think, that was happening there. Anyway, I don't need to talk about all of them individually, but I will say that I was very lucky because when I was coming back into writing, those were the spaces that I fell into first. And then it wasn't until like a year and a half later that I went into some other writing conferences and workshops, one that were predominantly white, but also not to overly romanticize. There was one that was really hard. That was a Black only space too, right? So. Yeah. But to me, that was an indication of, oh, right, we can be institutionalized in so many ways, right? Yeah. It wasn't the cohort that I was with, but it was very much the instructors were holding a very kind of conservative, traditional, literary, blah, 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 whatever you want to call that. I don't know, because I didn't go the MFA route, but that kind of hierarchical kind of structure, right? Anyway, so I didn't know until I got to some of those later things how lucky I was to have landed, because I didn't, I was just like, oh, the writing world has come so far because I feel so good and so like held and uplifted. And it has come far, and that there's more pockets like this, right? And I think, your podcast is like that too. There's more pockets where you can see yourself reflected. I don't want to quite say mirrored, because, the diaspora is very diverse and everybody has very different experiences. But again, there's this point of meeting or reflection, or again, affinity or kinship that just is very inherent in within the diaspora, right? Even as there's a lot of differences. And that there was something that I experienced without quite being able to know what it was until I experienced the other side of it. And now I'm like, oh, I am very aware of the difference, and I'm very careful about which works I bring into what spaces. Partially because, you know, especially for this first book that was so much about ancestry, I was like, oh, I can't be just having everybody comment on this thing that I'm writing that's so tender and so kind of ethereal in some ways and so deep in my body. I can't just have like every like Joe and Sally commenting on my
The Joe and Sally, like
on you know, because they're also you know, I'm also in this place where I'm like, I'm working so much with my ancestry. I believe that people show up with that in their field, right? Like when we're bringing it, when we're in a creative space, we're bringing so much of our life experience with us, right? And some of that again is a little more ethereal and more ancestral. And if I'm going to be really real and vulnerable and truthful, then I need to be in a space where I feel like people at least have enough affinity that they at least know that's happening, right? That's a happening for me. And then we can hold each other accordingly with that, right? That's why it's so important for me to be in BIPOC spaces. One of the things I'm working on up here, because I live up in Port Townsend, is it's a rural space, but unlike the South, because it's a rural space, it's predominantly white. But there is a group of BIPOC writers up here. And so we're working to kind of form a collective because we're like, we need to be able to be in this land that's beautiful, that we actually get access to, and be able to be with each other in it and not feel quite so much isolation and separation. Right.
So in preparation for today's chat, we always ask our guests to talk about why they write. Part of Elizabeth's response was this, and she kind of went into it a little bit earlier. I started writing young. As a child and coming into young adulthood, writing was really a way of exploring, articulating, and understanding my experience. And I mean across all social strata, race, gender, place, and belonging, what held value and worth for me, etc. My professional path led me more into the healing and process-oriented aspects of being a writer than into being an author. That's a huge distinction. For many, many years, I'm very glad for that study because it helps me hold myself close to my work in a very fulfilling and intimate way. Now, I am moving more into the author space, and by that I mean the public-facing aspect of writing. And I find myself in this deep inquiry about what that means for myself, for my work, for the world it's entering into. Can you share more about how your literary voice evolved and continues evolving? One of the things you shared, I didn't realize you didn't do an MFA. And then why is poetry the form that your literary voice mainly is contributing to the canon? Because I do know that you write some prose as well.
Yeah. I can pick up on the MFA thing because that also like is a thing. I haven't done one, and sometimes I really go back and forth about it still, right? And I've also gotten to a place where I'm like, from what I gather, I think for me, it's been more important to find these places like VONA, right? Like the Watering Hole, that I know are going to be able to hold my work in a really, and me, right? Because again, the way that I write is so entwined with who I am and how I move about in the world that, you know, it's personal. So I don't want to have to always like be in a place of needing to defend and separate myself out so that I can receive critique around my work, right? Like I want to be able to feel safe enough to receive it, knowing that it's being held as personal by the other folks around me too. And I don't know that I could have done that when I was younger. I don't know that I could have. So I did study creative writing as I got my bachelor's in creative writing and
Oh.
sociology, actually. So it was already kind of moving together that
How
way.
you keep yourself together by doing who? It's like you're critiquing society and then you're like reconstructing it in creative writing. I'm like, ah. I'm like, ah.
I don't know. It felt like the most natural thing for me. So I guess I have a I have a practitioner that I work with because I still do, receive a lot of healing work. And she gets into some astrology. She calls it cosmic wisdom, which I like a little bit more. It feels a little bit better for me. But she was talking about my Piscean nature and being like, well, Pisces likes to dream the world into being, but they like to dream like the world that they want and need to live in. And then they try to go about doing what they can to make the world so that they can live in it. Right.
Wait, when is your birthday? And I have a reason why I'm asking that question after you just made that comment.
March 14th.
So one of my bestest friends, Dr. Chicona, Diana Ray Alvarez, Pisces, March 11th. She's an amazing, oh my God. She's right now in Sweden with her partner, and they're working with youth, taking her her opera, and like I'll connect you at some point because her work is beautiful. But she always talks about like similarly her work does a lot of the same things that you just mentioned. And you're like, Pisces. I was like, wait a minute. I was like, you sound a lot like Diana. Yep. Y'all are Pisceans.
Yes,
Pisceans. I'm like, okay. I just have to insert that because I was like, when is her birth? Because she sounds like a, you know, that cusp. And yep, I was right.
We're doing it. Yeah. Yay. March 11th, Pisces. March Pisces too. I give a shout out. I have gotten a lot of flack as a Pisces for being like daydreamy or fantastical. And so I really appreciated the spin that this practitioner put on for me, which was like, no, you're dreaming the world as you would like to live in it. And so now you're creating things that will help that world come into being. Right. Which I was like, well, that sounds really empowering. Yes. I am down with that. But going back to so that's how I did. That is how I did creative writing and sociology at the same time. Was there's like just this natural inclination I have to be like, oh, this is why society is the way it is. Well, let me like. First of all, I had to be like, let me write about how it hurts me. And then I can start writing about, some of the things, again, that reparative piece, right? But I was doing that when I was in undergrad, and I started writing when I was really young. And I think, honestly, I just got a little bit scared about kind of the piece that I'm doing right now, which is the authorship, which is the public facing, what I consider to be the public facing part of the writing career, right? I'm still intimidated by it, and I'm trying to do it. So I didn't pursue my MFA then. And then after I've done, my life has unfolded how it's unfolded. And more I feel like, well, that was the only way it could have unfolded, right? Like that was how it needed to be for me. But I do have this feeling of like, I think I would have been, knowing myself when I was younger, I think if I had put myself in an MFA program, especially back in, this would have been like the early 2000s, I don't know that I would have had this confidence in myself and in my work and in my voice to protect my voice. I don't know that I would have had that. So I'm glad that I'm coming back to write. So that's what I mean when I say I'm glad that I had that pocket of time where I was able to keep my writing really close to myself and really intimate, because I have such a strong relationship to it now that I feel a lot better about putting it out into the world, which doesn't mean I feel totally comfortable, but I feel a lot better putting it out into the world than I think I would have, in my 20s.
Yeah, and I did my MFA in a different field, and one of the reasons why I'm getting my doctorate is I hope to, really look at the arts professional training programs. I have this is a whole other conversation in terms of like how we prepare people for their respective professions. And I'm like, I have so much to say about BFA, MFA, conservatory based programs. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
so much. So
I want to
much.
hear all of it.
So much. We're gonna be, girl, we're gonna be to next week. Like this was a marathon episode of Black Writers Read. We're gonna be posting it in part 2, like part 9 today.
Of the saga. It can be a saga.
Of the saga. So we have a couple more questions, but I want to thank folks for continuing to stay on. We have another question from Opal.
Yes.
Do you have a special writing ritual? I know for myself, I have one, so I would love to hear. And all of us, and Opal, that's such a great question.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Thanks, Opal. I want to hear yours too. I have some writing rituals. I find that this is kind of cool because I've started writing I've started writing fiction, which is new for me.
Wow.
And so I found it's wild. Let me tell you that it is wild. I found that I need a different writing ritual for fiction than I do for poetry, which is, I'm like, of course that can make sense. But when I discovered that, I was like, ooh, I wasn't quite expecting that. I do have an altar space that I try to light up before I get into writing. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. That definitely happens a little bit more when I'm ready to put things on my computer. Poetry, I have to write by hand first. And so part of my ritual for writing poetry is actually being outside, or at least being near a window, because there's just something about the way that my hand is moving and my eyes are moving, and I don't know, it's just I have to space out. I have to space out while I'm doing it. But I am an altar lover, so I do have at least like lighting a candle. Sometimes and sometimes I'll set an intention as I'm lighting the candle for what I want to do in the space. And sometimes the intention is just like, I think I'm going to try to write this hard thing. So I'm going to light this candle just to bring forth any support, any energetic support I can have around this hard thing. So that's one of mine. What's yours? What do you do?
Mine, it really depends. So like, I'm one of those people where like, I have to carry around something with me because a lot of times inspiration sparks when I'm in like weird spaces. But if I have a particular project, like with the poem that I wrote with Ella Nathaniel Akowitz's piece, I like set myself up, I lit a candle, I did about a 5-minute meditation, and I like spent some time with her work, and I handwrite everything too as well. And nothing hits the computer until I've done multiple drafts. And I also do a lot of journaling. So sometimes I will not only reflect on like that day and that week, but I'll be like, okay, what did I write? Now, other writing, dissertation writing, y'all don't want to know that ritual. It's a hot mess. It's like, just get it done. Just get it done. Some of my poetry and also some of my playwriting, there's not really a ritual. It's literally when an idea sparks. Sometimes it's been in the shower. Sometimes it's been in a dream, which I need to start keeping a dream journal because I've always wanted to explore science fiction and fantasy. And I keep the dreams that I have are not only so vivid, but they're so futuristic and these like very possible worlds. And I'm like, I need to start doing dream journaling so I can like document many of the experiences that happen in my dreams, because I'm like, I feel like I can be an Octavia Butler where it's like that future like what is possible, and I'm like, but I need to be able to like create a ritual around processing the dreams that I have.
Yeah, do it. Dreams are so, I mean, that's actually how I started writing fiction too, is because I was having kind of dreams probably along the similar lines you're talking about, where I was just like, that was like I was just in a whole other world. Like, what were we doing over there? And I remember always being in awe of fiction writers, because I was always like, how do they just come up with this stuff? I don't, they just generate things out of nowhere. And then I realized like, oh, there's whole worlds happening while we sleep.
Yes.
You can write that down.
Yeah, like I was telling my husband last night, I had a dream about him and I, and it's rare that I like dream of specific people too. Like it didn't start happening until my parents passed, where I started dreaming of specific people. So last night the dream was my husband and I, we crashed a wedding. I'm like, why would we didn't know the couple, we didn't know anybody there. We legit crashed a wedding. And I'm like, it's something that him and I would probably do, he would do. We're complete opposites. I'm extreme extrovert and he is like complete opt. I'm telling you, complete opposite. And I'm like, I need to start writing this down. Like that would be, a really fun adventure. And that's like the other reason why I need to do more writing is because I want to be able to take myself to the worlds. Well, I'm not going to say for free, but like write the worlds that will hopefully pay to take me to the worlds that I want to go to.
There you go. I like that.
Yes.
I like that intentionality.
I'm like, yes.
Let's get on the world making train.
Right. Be like, and I'm working my way up. I'm hoping through like theater. I want to get a Drama Desk Award at some point for writing an off-Broadway piece. Like it's gonna happen.
I heard it. It's gonna happen.
Yes. And speaking of new work, forthcoming. And I love that I'm like, wow, Elizabeth's busy. Forthcoming is the anthology. We talked about it in our initial like phone call. The anthology Poetry of Spellcasting, Poems, Essays, and Prompts for Manifesting Liberation and Reclaiming Power, which will be published by North Atlantic Books, for which you serve as the co-editor. Can you give us a brief tour of the curation process of this collection and what folks can expect when they buy and read the book?
Yes. I have a copy right here. So we got them. This is cool looking.
Oh, wow.
Isn't it nice? So this book, I co-edited with Tamiko Bayer, and Destiny Hemphill, who are both amazing poets. Destiny has a book out just recently called Mother World, which is a devotional. I can't remember the subtitle, but it's a devotional ritual. It's stunning. Everybody go get it. And Tamiko Bayer's most recent book was called Last Days, which was also very emergent, like an emergent strategy poem kind of. That's my classification of it. Very, very good. So we met pre-pandemic, and there's a very long backstory to this, so I'll just skip to the key points. We met pre-pandemic, and we all realized that we were poets who also worked in ritual in some ways, or in social justice or healing justice in some ways. And Tamiko actually gathered us. Well, I want to mention Kenji C. Liu, who's also in this book, who mentioned something around, this must have been around 2016. I don't know why I'm so oriented around it. It was such a traumatic year. Who was mentioning that writers, in particular poets, have this connection with language that we can really utilize to transform the world, right? And so Tamiko was very moved by that. And then Tamiko and Destiny and I all got together, and we actually did a panel up here at the And Now Festival, which is like innovative writing and experimental writing at University of Washington. And we did a panel where we were like, well, let's try this out. Like, what is poetry and spellcasting? What does that mean to each of us? How do we do it? Do we feel like we're using it? And so we all came together with Tatiana Figueroa Ramirez, who's also in this book, and just had some discussion about like, what does that mean? And then we led folks in like a communal poetry writing that became a communal poem, a collective poem. And then we sent the energy from that poem to like an ICE unit, an ICE unit that was nearby where we were. So that was the beginning, and it was very potent. And then Tamiko also did this at AWP of 2020, which was like, that AWP. And somebody from North Atlantic went to that panel and was like, this would be interesting. Have you thought about turning this into a book? And we were like, no, but we can think about it. So it was kind of like a dream. That's the dream scenario, right? That somebody's going to see your work and be like, We want it. Which is what happened. So we were thinking about poetry as spellcasting and how to turn it into a book. And really what came through was like, well, this is about the collective, right? This is about us all garnering our collective power and our, I don't want to say mastery, but our like affluence, our affinity, whatever, with language, right? The ways that we work with language to really reclaim power for ourselves, right? And again, like speaking into being the world that we are wanting, that we are needing. So we knew that it was going to be a collective effort. We knew that we wanted it to be primarily, if not all, BIPOC contributors, most of whom identify also as queer, along with the editors, right? So the editors also identify as like, variously as like mixed race and BIPOC and ritualist and queer, and these are our identities coming through. So we were like, okay, well, I guess it has to be an anthology because we need more voices in here, and we need the voices that aren't usually in predominant or dominate either of these spaces. So the voices that are often left out of the literary and poetry world, and the voices that are often left out of the spellcasting, the witchy world, especially as like the new age has come through, right? Especially since so many of these practices are diasporic and indigenous, right? So that's where it started, and editing is really a thing. So I'm amazed. I don't know how people edit things by themselves, for one. And I'm just really, really grateful for my co-editors. You know, we did this during the pandemic. So we were reaching out to writers, you know, and this is why editing is hard, because we don't want to be a gatekeeper, and we want to be really inclusive. And then we also need to be realistic. We're wanting to be realistic about our capacities, because it was also the pandemic. And so actually that was one of the guiding intentions for curating and editing this book was, let's take care of each other and ourselves. This is a really, really hard time. Let's do what we can to take care of our contributors. Let's show up with like a lot of integrity and love for each other, and just move at the pace that feels doable for us. Like, let's not reenact any of this, like, you know, hyper individualism or capitalism, or like, we need to get this product together and it has to look like this. Like, how can we have this be an organic piece and body that comes together in the way that it needs to, and then let it move as it needs to. So we weren't able to do, because of that, we decided not to do a wide open call, but we did spread the net pretty far and wide for folks that we, who already kind of identified as writing along this axis, or being in this practice of liberatory language and social transformation and personal transformation. So we reached out to those folks and got some yeses and got some nos, and then we're like, here's our broad stroke vision. Here's some key things we think we want to cover. Let us just write whatever you feel like you need to write in response to that. And we got some really amazing, amazing essays. So the book is just what it says. It's poems, essays, and prompts. So there's some essays from, you know, Alexis Pauline Gumbs is in here, Lauren Deshay is in here, Dominique Mati, Hejun Cook, Lou Flores, Tatiana. There's like so many people. I kind of want to name everybody. I know we have time. And people shared their thoughts about different aspects of poetry as spellcasting, and then some people shared some poems, and then some people actually shared some prompts, and then we also wrote some prompts that were just kind of about how do we access this particular wisdom, right? That's coming through. And we did it totally virtually over 3 years, and it's out next in May 16th. Yeah. Yeah, it's a thing. I imagine it's probably way easier than writing a dissertation. But I imagine I was like, there was so much like gathering and collecting and pulling and then like honing and then moving and shifting. And it was probably one of the longer projects that I've worked on.
Wow.
Yeah,
with the whole AI and stuff. Like my cohort and I, we joke, we're like, can we like chat whatever the new AI our dissertation is? Because like I can't. Like I have lived with this. I'm like, I want to be done with you. Like I just want good. Like just birth yourself, and I'll be done. Birth yourself. Like just
right.
you got this.
Self-actualize, go.
Self-actualize, go. So I can call because I have the goal of calling myself doctor before I start back teaching in the fall. I'm like, just come on, like, I have the wizard outfit already. I have the regalia. Just write yourself.
That's nice. That's right, because you're doing your commencement. You'd be like, we're already here.
We're already here. Commencement is next week. I'm like, for folks. We with my program, because the undergraduate and graduate academic calendars fall very differently. Commencement happens based on the undergraduate calendar and not the graduate. So we walk before we present our dissertations. But I have so many edits to do, and I have an entire 2 chapters to write still. But I am hoping to like present in July. I'm not saying August, July. So I'm like, because also too, we have to pay a dissertation continuation fee, and I was like, nope. When I heard how much it was, I was like, nope. They were like every 8 weeks. I was like, nope.
I will complete. I will complete this.
Nope. Like,
Yeah.
not no.
Yeah.
So I'd love to close out our afternoon/evening, depending on where people are joining us from. What is next for you, Lisbeth, and how can the Black Writers Read community support you on that journey?
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet. I'm just gonna keep trying to do this author thing. So this was great. This was very supportive because I'm like, this is the kind of space that I love to be in and be invited into, and it makes it very easy to like just show up as myself, and not my brand or whatever that may be. I'm going to keep going with this. We got Poetry of Spellcasting, which is going to be launching. So this will be good to know. There will be some regional activations, we're calling them, ritual activations of the book. So over the course of the next year. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest, we're finalizing this now, but hopefully there will be an event in Seattle in the beginning of the summer. And then we'll do another event later in the year in North Carolina, and then another event in your neck of the woods in Massachusetts, probably the following year. So there's going to be some opportunities to play and do some rituals, poetry, spellcasting things. And then, as I mentioned, I started writing some fiction, so I'm going to try to see what happens. See if I can write a novel. Let me try that. It'll probably be
have you back.
A similar experience as like, why did I start doing this? But so far it's really beautiful and fun. Yeah. And then, I guess my question is like, how can we also support this? Because this is, mutual. This is what our communities, we were already talking about collaboration, right? And how do we strengthen as artist communities? So I would also want to know how to support you. And I am interested in seeing this poem / exhibition that you wrote for, and all of the new things that are going to be happening with Black Writers Read.
Yes. So I think it's called Speaking in Colors. I think it was open for National Poetry Month. It's at 50 Arrow Gallery in East Hampton, Massachusetts. Go to the website, and it's by appointment only. Then in terms of Black Writers Read, I'm going to be very honest. I'm still growing my audience. This is our 3rd year. We've grown a lot, but I feel like in order to make this financially stable, I need more supporters. I went shopping around recently for sponsorships and for other podcasters to do commercials on here, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't have a big enough fan base. I was told they were like, you don't have enough downloads, you don't have a big enough subscriber base, and I'm like, folks, subscribe, share. Like, you don't need to contribute money, because there are ways that you can contribute me money. Because right now this is a self-funded endeavor. To start off this fruition of Black Writers Read, I did an Indiegogo campaign. I had, like a silent funder, but to sustain it, and people don't realize this platform to do this costs a lot of money. And right now I am paying completely out of pocket. You don't even have to contribute any money. Share episodes, talk about it. Soon I'll be releasing information about the summer virtual book club that we're launching this year. To subscribing to my YouTube channel, to the platform where you get the podcast, like spread the word. Because there's at least 5 different Black writer, Black author podcast platforms that exist. And Black Writers Read, we honor all of those spaces. We actually had, someone on, recently who runs one of those spaces. Yeah. What I want Black Writers Read to do is, especially me as an educator, the educator piece is just so important. So we'll be coming up hopefully with like reader guides, similarly to what Perugia Press does, the book clubs, things like that. So right now what folks can do, and thank you for asking that, is in terms of supporting, getting the word out on Black Writers Read, because the more people hear about it, the more supporters that I can get. And then the more supporters I can get, I can leverage more sponsorship. And you may hear my chihuahua barking in the background.
Testifying, like, yes, subscribe, everybody.
My chihuahua double is testifying right now. I don't know if you can hear her, and also too, I need to tend to animals soon. But that's the way, because in order for me to leverage more financial capital, I need to garner more supporters. So that would be the way for folks to share anything that comes out about Black Writers Read, talk it up. And also too, all of my guests, including you, have just been so humble with sharing that you'll be on, and also too, just really gracious and patient with me, because all of the people don't realize all of the front loading that we do to get our guests to hear is a lot, including questions. We have them fill out a lot of forms. Also too, we offer an honorarium to all of our guests. So we do a lot of things on the back end. And I also now have an assistant, and I'm hoping to bring on an associate producer. And this is something, hopefully Opal's still on, but this is something that I've been dreaming up for a long time, and just really growing the platform and touring it, doing live Black Writers Reads in person across the country.
Oh my gosh, that would be wonderful.
So I continue growing. I look forward to continue growing. If folks have feedback for me, please, anything. I'm looking for, I'm hoeing it right now. Everything. I'm walking the corner for Black Writers Read.
Wow, in the streets, in the literary streets.
I'm in the literary streets, girl. I'm in this bibliophile streets right now.
Bibliophile streets.
The bibliophile streets. Hey, Black Writers Read.
Swinging. That's great. So, okay. Well, thank you for letting me know. I mean, you are extremely thoughtful throughout this whole process, and I can feel it, right? I can feel the level of attention that you bring, which is why it feels so good to be on here. So, but that level of attention doesn't come without support, right?
Thank you for that. And all of my Black Writers Reads guests have just been so gracious and so humble. But also too, I'm giving you your flowers, because I curate a very particular space, and I don't just have anybody on either. These are not only writers that I admire, but specifically these are writers and authors, because I have a lot of folks on who have chosen not to publish yet,
Mm-hmm.
who are making significant impacts on the canon. So it's not just any Black writer, but it's like, what are you doing to inform and change the canon? Because I'm like, yes, there are writers who are doing great, amazing things, but I'm like, you're replicating systems, and I'm just like, what are you doing that is like telling the canon, yo, we're here, like what the fuck, like
yeah. We're here, out here in the literary streets.
We are here in the dignified literary streets. Yes. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Everyone, thank you for joining us for this almost 2-hour ride. This was amazing.
Sorry, y'all. I hope there's some good nuggets in there.
This was great. This was so great.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to do a little bit of wrapping up here to end the evening. So Black Writers Read will be back later in May. Please be sure to find us on Instagram. Another way to support at Black Writers Read over the coming weeks for the upcoming lineup of our guests. Find me and more about Black Writers Read online at NicoleMYoung.com. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel to keep up with episodes of both Black Writers Read and my other projects. Also, be sure to subscribe to the audio podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Also, to be on the lookout, blackwritersread.com will be launching soon. I have been working with Fanga Chichuagawa, who has been on before, and Artist Dynamics for the past couple of months to officially launch the Black Writers Read website. So be on the lookout for that soon. So thanks to all of you for spending your afternoon and early evening, because we went into 2 hours, with us, and more importantly, for ensuring that Black authors continue to matter. Have a great, amazing afternoon, evening, and life.